And a soldier spoke. The call came through on a Tuesday, and it didn't go to the front desk. Amir. It went directly to the floor supervisor's radio, which was sitting on the counter 6 feet from where Sasha Bellamy was restocking the medication cabinet in Bay 4. Doing the job nobody else wanted to do, the way she'd been doing it for 11 weeks. I mean, the voice on the radio said 3 words before the static cut back in. We need Phantom. And the floor supervisor, a man named Clifford who had worked Mercy Regional's emergency department for 9 years and believed he had seen everything, went very still. He looked at the radio. He looked at the room. And then, because the voice had said it again, cleaner this time, no static, completely certain, he looked at Sasha. She had already set down the medication tray. She walked toward the radio without being asked. The morning Sasha Bellamy arrived at Mercy Regional Medical Center in Duluth, Minnesota. She came in through the side entrance, Eugene, which most people only used when the parking lot filled up and the overflow pushed you around the building. She used it because it was quiet, because fewer people meant fewer introductions, and fewer introductions meant fewer questions about the employment gap in her file that HR had flagged twice during onboarding, and she'd answered the same way both times. Normal circumstances. Fully resolved. Here are my credentials. Credentials were real. Her Minnesota nursing license was current. Her references were solid, and had been specifically chosen for what they would say and what they would not. The hiring coordinator, Prozac gear, a woman named Petra, who wore reading glasses on a beaded lanyard and had the efficient kindness of someone who had processed a great many new hires and no longer confused efficiency with coldness, Nauk, flipped through her paperwork and offered her a handshake. You'll start on standard floor rotation, Petra said. Medication management, supply inventory, backup documentation support. Once you've been through the department's orientation cycle, we'll look at expanded assignments. I nodded. Who should I check in with? His expression did a small, careful thing, not quite a wince, something adjacent to it. Dr. Oren Stahl runs the ER. He's the one who signs off on expanded assignments. A pause. He has a system. Just give it time to make sense. Mentor grinned. Sasha had learned to translate that kind of pause. It meant the system doesn't always make sense, but pointing that out early gets you nowhere. Understood, she said. Mentor spoke. She found out what Stahl's system looked like on her 3rd day. Dr. Oren Stahl was 51, the kind of tall that had been impressive at 30 and was now simply his, a feature like the gray at his temples. And the reading glasses he wore pushed up on his forehead even when he wasn't reading. He was the kind of physician who had been in the department long enough that the line between his skills and the department's identity had blurred almost completely. He ran the ER the way. Some people ran their homes, with total certainty that his way was not just one way but the correct way, and that any deviation from it was not a different approach but an error. Nide was good at the clinical work. Sasha recognized that immediately. She'd worked with enough physicians to know the difference between someone who'd accumulated expertise and someone who'd accumulated authority, and Stahl had both. The problem was that the authority had outlasted his curiosity. When a soldier spoke, he'd stopped asking why things worked and started assuming he already knew, and that shift, almost invisible from the outside, made him dangerous in the specific way that confident, competent people became dangerous when they stopped updating their assumptions. Out of his way. Until she couldn't. Man, it was her 4th week when she saw the patient in Bay 3. 42-year-old woman, Clara Sonberg, referred from urgent care for chest tightness and shortness of breath, initially triaged as anxiety. The triage note said cardiac workup recommended, but not urgent. The attending who'd seen her first had written low suspicion for acute event and moved on to the next patient. Dead. Sasha was doing medication rounds when she passed Bay 3 for the second time in an hour. Something made her stop. Not dramatic, not instinctive in the way people described instinct, sudden and electric. More like the quiet accumulation of details that her brain had been filing without her conscious permission. Nail beds, the patient's nail beds. The way she was sitting, not anxious upright, but fatigued upright. The position of someone whose body was working very hard just to maintain itself. The color at her mouth. Sasha flagged it loudly, not to stall directly. She went to the charge RN, a woman named Keeley, whose default mode was brisk competence, and who Sasha had not yet figured out whether she was an ally or a weather system to be navigated. I want to note concern on Sonberg in Bay 3, Sasha said. The presentation looks more like decompensation than anxiety. I think she needs a repeat EKG and a troponin panel. Malman Keeley looked at her, the way a person looked at someone who had been at a job for 4 weeks and was questioning an attending's assessment. Dr. Stahl, she said. It all came by Bay 3. 7 minutes later. He reviewed the chart. He glanced at the patient. He looked at Sasha with the expression of a man who had been in medicine for 25 years and had long since stopped finding it interesting when nurses flagged things above their station. Oh my. She's been worked up, he said. The presentation is consistent with the original assessment. The nail beds are showing cyanotic changes, Sasha said, and her fatigue pattern is... Thank you, nurse. He checked the badge. Bellamy, I'll call you if I need a second opinion. He walked away. Sasha went back to her medication rounds. 40 minutes later, the rapid response team was in Bay 3. Coded. The team brought her back. She was moved to the cardiac ICU with a diagnosis of N-STAMI, a heart attack that the initial workup had missed, and that, had it been caught 40 minutes earlier when Sasha flagged it, would have had a significantly better window for intervention. Stahl never mentioned the flag to her directly. That would have required acknowledging she'd been right. What happened instead was the institutional version of a closed door. The supply rotation that was supposed to be temporary became a fixed feature of her schedule. Expanded assignments that had been discussed during onboarding stopped being discussed. She was redirected, quietly and consistently, away from patient-facing work. Then a soldier spoke. She understood the mechanism. She'd seen it in other institutions, not hospitals, closer to the kinds of places that didn't appear on civilian resumes. The person who sees the error doesn't get punished by name. They get managed by task. Kept busy with things that don't put them in proximity to the person who was wrong in front of witnesses. Shelves. She updated medication logs. She cross-referenced supply inventories with a precision that she suspected nobody else on the floor would have brought to it, because she was who she was, and being who she was had never included the ability to do a job carelessly, just because the job was small. Doing small jobs with total attention was that eventually people noticed. Not Stahl, not the way that mattered, but the overnight nurses, the techs, the paramedics who came in with the air ambulances and had to sign off on supply handoffs. They noticed that the logs were cleaner when Bellamy had been on. Lamb spoke. That the crash carts were fully stocked in the right configuration, which was not always the case before her, because whoever had been doing it previously had been approximating. Named Rui. A tech named Ruiz, who had been at Mercy Regional for 7 years and had the institutional memory of someone who'd watched the same patterns recycle many times, found her in the supply room once in week 6. He stood in the doorway for a moment, before he said anything. "And you flagged Sondberg," he said. "In a question." I did," she said. Man, Stahl know you know the outcome? Man, Stahl knows what he knows, she said. Imagine. Ruiz leaned against the doorframe. How long were you in the field? Dawn. She went still in the way she did when questions got close to things she wasn't ready to answer. What makes you ask? Ben? The way you stocked the trauma cart, he said simply. Civilian nurses put things where the protocol says. You put them where you'd actually reach for them under pressure. He shrugged. Different muscle memory. He looked at the cart. He wasn't wrong. And Spolsky said, I was in the field a while. Men? He nodded once and didn't push, which was the response of someone who'd been around enough people with complicated histories to understand that the information would come out when it was ready, or it wouldn't. And neither outcome was his to manage. On, rotation continued. Week 7, week 8. She ran in the mornings before her shifts, a route that took her along the lake shore where Lake Superior did what it always did, indifferent and enormous and completely unmoved by whatever was happening in the city beside it. She found that useful. The lake didn't care who she'd been. It was just water, cold and old and reliable. Omar spoke. She saw a therapist named Dr. Ingram on Wednesdays. He had the careful, unhurried manner of someone who had learned that the fastest way through difficult material was not speed, but patience. They talked around the edges of things, mostly the tours, the noise, the way her nervous system had developed certain habits in high-stress environments that did not automatically deactivate when the environment changed. Number. What do you do? He asked once. When you feel yourself going into operational mode in a situation that isn't a field situation. Categorize, she said. I assess threat. I identify assets. I figure out what I actually have to work with. Amen. Does it help? Amen, she considered it. It keeps me from doing anything I can't undo. Dr. Ingram wrote something down. She didn't ask what. The problem with operational habits was that they didn't turn off. They processed everything, including the things she would have preferred not to see clearly. Ern installs scheduling decisions over 11 weeks. Like the way he spoke about her to Keeley, not to her face, but in the spaces she was adjacent to. She'd assembled the picture from fragments, the way she'd assembled pictures from fragments in environments where missing a detail could be the last mistake you made. Man, the picture was not flattering. It was not, she decided, accidental. The Tuesday. The call came in. She was on hour 3 of a supply shift that was identical to the 50 or so supply shifts that had preceded it. The medication cabinet in Bay 4 needed restocking. The crash cart in Bay 2 was 2 units short on a particular epinephrine formulation that she'd flagged in the log already. The overhead lighting in the storage corridor had been flickering for a week, and the maintenance request had disappeared into whatever administrative void maintenance requests disappeared into at Mercy Regional. Muse spoke. She was counting a row of IV saline bags when the radio went off. Munson. She heard it, the way she heard things that mattered. Completely, instantly, with the part of her brain that had been trained for 11 years to separate signal from noise. And this is Unit 7, Federal Task Force, requesting medical coordination at Mercy Regional. Priority personnel casualty inbound. We need Phantom. Repeat, we need Phantom. Supervisor Clifford responded with the professional confusion of someone who had no frame of reference for what he'd just heard. This is Mercy Regional ER. Please identify the nature of the medical emergency and your ETA. ET 4 minutes. The casualty is one of ours. We were told Phantom was at this facility. We need that individual in the ER now. This is not a request. Sasha set down the saline bag. Moving. She was already moving when Clifford's eyes found her across the supply room. She didn't explain. There wasn't time to explain, and the part of this she could explain wasn't the part that was going to help anyone in the next 4 minutes. Bay 1, she said to him as she passed. Tell them to clear Bay 1. The vehicle hit the ambulance bay doors at a speed that suggested the driver had made a decision about traffic laws that he'd answer for later. Opened, and 2 people in federal tactical gear came through first, and between them, on a carry stretcher, was a man in his mid-40s, whose left leg was wrapped in a field tourniquet that had been placed correctly but too long ago, and whose face had the particular grayish pallor that meant the blood pressure was in a conversation with the floor, and the floor was winning. Agents. A woman in a suit with the bearing of someone who had been in rooms that made emergency rooms look calm. Sasha was at the stretcher, before it cleared the doors. To knee. The wound was below the knee, exit wound larger than entry, which told her the round had tumbled. The tourniquet had been placed at the right location, but the extremity below it had been compromised for longer than the protocol window. The man was in compensated shock, still conscious, eyes tracking, but the compensation wouldn't hold much longer. Come on, how long on the tourniquet? 2 minutes, the agent on the left said. We had no option earlier. Exfil was hot. Dan. 43 minutes. She did the math the way she'd done it, in places where math was the only thing standing between a decision and a catastrophe. Like. IV established? Line. Right AC, running wide open. Remain. Get me another bag. Large bore, left if you can. She was already at the stretcher, gloved, assessing the wound beneath the tourniquet with the focused economy of someone who'd seen this specific injury architecture before and knew what the next 5 decisions needed to be. Behind her, she was aware of the ER staff organizing in the way ER staff organized when something unusual arrived, with the mixture of competence and caution that meant they were waiting for someone to establish authority in the room. Livingston Stahl arrived from the corridor. Red-eye. He took in the agents, the stretcher, the federal vehicle visible through the bay doors. His expression processed the scene in the order that Sasha had predicted it would. Authority first, information second. Come on, what's the situation? He directed this at the agents, not at Sasha. Wound, lower extremity, extended tourniquet time. Your people are already on it. The agent's eyes tracked to Sasha without moving to her. Stahl looked at Sasha for the first time. Bellamy. His voice had the quality of a sentence that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. This came through proper intake. It came through radio 4 minutes ago. The patient needed to be in a bay. She didn't look up from the wound. His pressure is dropping. He needs surgical evaluation, vascular. And I'd want imaging before we talk about tourniquet release. She glanced up. Do you want to take it from here, or should we keep moving? The room held its breath. Stahl held his. Well, that? The agent near the door said quietly, to no one specifically. She's right on the vascular. Moved to the other side of the stretcher, not with the force of someone reasserting authority. With the movement of someone who had calculated in about 4 seconds that there was a version of this situation where he moved forward and a version where he didn't, and had chosen the former. Get me vascular on the phone, he said to Keeley, who was already at the desk. And imaging. Sasha kept working. In the stretcher. The man on the stretcher, whose name she didn't know yet, whose clearance level she'd infer later from the things. People around him didn't say, found her eyes at some point in the following 8 minutes. He was in enough pain that focused attention cost him something, but he held it. Orgasm, he said. The word came out raspy. Post-adrenaline, dehydration, blood loss. Any more, she said, the same way she'd said everything else. Steady. You're in a hospital. Miss. You're her, he said. I'm a nurse. Lie still. Matters, he lay still. The woman in the suit, who had stationed herself at the edge of Bay 1 with the stillness of someone accustomed to waiting, without looking like she was waiting, approached when the immediate intervention was stabilized, and the vascular surgeon, a man named Dr. Chian, who had arrived at a near run, had taken over primary assessment. "Me," she said. Her name spoke. Sasha turned. To the woman was 50-something, with the economic posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms designed to apply pressure, and had arrived at her own equilibrium with that pressure long ago. She held credentials that she showed without fanfare. "Danshan Lin Archer," she said. "Federal Task Force, Organized Crime, and Protective Operations." A pause that was not unfriendly but was very precise. "We've been looking for you for about 2 months. I looked at her. "How'd you find me?" "In logs," Archer said. "The cross-referencing system. Specific methodology. We flagged it in a database search. Something that was not quite a smile. It's a distinctive approach." Ruiz had noticed the muscle memory in how she stalked the cart. The federal government had noticed it in her paperwork. She supposed there were worse ways to be found. "And what do you need?" Sasha said. "Right now, I need to speak with you. After that, we have a situation that I think you need to know about." Archer glanced toward the bay where Dr. Chian was working. "But first, how is he?" "We'll keep the leg if vascular gets there in time," Sasha said. It was close. It absorbed that without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. "He asked for you specifically. When we got the call on his location, his first question was whether Phantom was traceable. He wouldn't let us move him until we could confirm you were in range." Ragnar looked at the bay. "Who is he?" "Inegiu." "A name you knew under different circumstances," Archer said. "He's been running deep cover for 3 years. His extraction went bad. His team held a position for 40 minutes so we could get him out, and the leg was the price of that." Devik, 3 years under cover. She'd known people who did that work, knew what it cost, knew that the people who asked for a specific person by call sign when they were bleeding out were not doing it frivolously. "Okay," she said. "Come on, okay? And to you. Let me finish here first." Archer nodded. She was already stepping back, giving the bay room to function. Tashin. What happened in the next hour was the clinical part, which Sasha moved through with the same attention she'd brought to every supply count and every medication log in 11 weeks, because the size of the task had never been the point. The point was that someone needed something done, and she was capable of doing it. And the combination of those two facts had its own logic that didn't depend on anyone else's recognition. Roman was good. She clocked that within 90 seconds of watching him work, news the coordination. He had the hands and head coordination of someone who had done this specific procedure enough times that his decision-making had compacted into something that looked like intuition, but was actually depth. When the patient stabilized enough for transport to the OR, Chian looked at the field tourniquet placement and the improvised wound packing and said, without looking up, "Who did the initial management?" "I did," Sasha said. A pause. "Good work." He said it, the way surgeons said things when they had something better to do than elaborate, which was actually when they meant it most. "Come find me after." She didn't get the chance to come find him after, because the hour that followed was not the quiet settling she'd been expecting. Stahl found her at the nurse's station, in the expression of someone who had spent 60 minutes rearranging his understanding of something and hadn't finished. He stood close enough to be clearly speaking to her, and far enough to maintain the ambiguity of the hallway. The position she recognized as someone who hadn't committed yet to whatever they were about to say. "Agent," he said. She asked about you. No. I'm going to speak with her. Mard used. She asked about your assignment here. He set his tablet on the counter without looking at it. About your rotation. Bill waited. Sasha. She wanted to see the scheduling records, Stahl said. For the last 11 weeks. Something settled very quietly in Sasha's chest. Not surprise. The opposite of surprise. The confirmation of something she'd known the shape of for weeks without being able to prove it. Did she say why? A moment. Stahl looked at the floor for a moment. She said it was part of a routine review of the personnel file. He picked up his tablet. It wasn't, though. Was it? A question. So, she didn't answer it, like one. I'm going to speak with Agent Archer, she said. I'll check back in when I'm done. Away from him. And the sound of the ER continued around her. The monitors, the PA, the rolling carts. And she let it be exactly what it was, a working emergency department in a Midwestern city on a Tuesday. Nothing more and nothing less, even though it was also everything else. Mears room. The conversation with Archer happened in a conference room on the second floor that smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long, and the particular staleness of a room used mostly by people who wanted to be somewhere else. Commandeered it without asking. And the door was closed. And on the table were two items, a thin folder, and Archer's hands, flat on the table, the posture of someone who had decided to be direct. Remembered your tracks well, Archer said. Enough, apparently. Woman, you were never going to be untraceable, not with your background. The best you could do was slow us down, and you did. She opened the folder. 2 months. Man. Sasha, what's in there? Your assignment history, Archer said. The parts that are declassified. And a flag on your employment conditions at this hospital. She turned a page. The scheduling records show 11 consecutive weeks of non-patient-facing assignment for a nurse with your qualifications. That pattern triggered an automatic review when your name came up in connection with today's retrieval. It triggered a review because of what I did in the bay today. And a review because of who you are and what the scheduling looked like in context. Archer was precise about it. We're not here to tell you how to do your job, Bellamy. We're here because one of ours needed you, and because what we found when we started pulling the thread on your situation here. She paused. It's not nothing. I looked at the table. The Sonberg flag. Now spoke. We have it, and the documentation of the rotation that followed. Archer turned another page. And communications between Dr. Stahl and your department's nurse manager from your second week here. Minute Gearware to Turnsley said. What kind of communications? Committees. The kind that explain why your rotation didn't expand the way your onboarding documentation said it would. Archer set the page so Sasha could read it. She read it. It took less than 3 minutes and was one of the colder things she had read in a career that had given her occasion to read cold things. Alan's message, 3 days after the Sonberg flag, was 6 lines. The relevant portion. New hire Bellamy flagged a patient case above her competency level. Recommend holding expanded rotation indefinitely. I don't want someone with her kind of instability in a patient-facing role until we understand her background better. Background? The employment gap. The redacted portions of a file he had no clearance to read and had characterized as instability. The nurse manager's response was 2 sentences and a scheduling adjustment that had propagated through 11 weeks of assignments without a single review flag from HR. He used the word instability. Sasha said. Yes, he did. I flagged a cardiac event that he'd missed. Mine shows. The cards to sit dense. Sasha set the page down. Outside the conference room, the hospital continued to function. Somewhere below them, in the OR, a man who had asked for her by a name she no longer used was on a surgical table with one of his legs. She thought about that, about the 43 minutes his team had held a position so he could be extracted, about what it meant to hold a position when the math of it was clearly against you. What happens now? She said. An inquiry. We're initiating a formal inquiry into the assignment conditions here. The Sonberg case creates a specific avenue for that because the outcome involved patient harm that may have been mitigable. Archer closed the folder, and we'll be speaking with Dr. Stahl and your nurse manager this afternoon. Irma looked at the window. Duluth in October had a particular quality of light. Gray and clean. The lake visible from most second-floor windows, its surface doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent. She'd chosen this city because of that quality. Because something about the indifference of that water helped her feel like the noise in her own head was appropriately sized. Tisba said. You were going to ask me something else, she said, before the inquiry part. I looked at her for a moment. Yes. She folded her hands. The man in the OR, his operation is ongoing. His cover identity needs to be maintained, which means his medical care needs to be coordinated by someone with the clearance to know who he actually is. She paused. That's a short list. You're on it. Moment. You want me involved in his post-op care. And of the option. It's your choice. A moment. Sasha was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the lake was doing its thing, vast and unperturbed and utterly disinterested in the conversation happening in this conference room. What was his first question? She said. When you confirmed I was traceable, Bernard Archer's expression shifted very slightly. He asked if you were okay. Something moved in Sasha's chest that she didn't have immediate words for. He asked if you could reach him in time, Archer added. That was his sequence. First, is she okay? Second, can she get here? At the Carmi beneath Ed. Sasha looked at the folder on the table, at the printed exchange between Stahl and the nurse manager, at 11 weeks of supply schedules on the page beneath it. She said. I'll coordinate the care. She stood. I need to get back to the floor. Archer stood too. We'll be in touch about the inquiry. I know. The conference drawn. She walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down and came back into the ER, which was loud and busy and completely ordinary in all the ways emergency departments were ordinary when they weren't being extraordinary. And she went back to the nurse's station and picked up the chart that was sitting in the pending slot and started to read it. Marman. She was 4 lines in when Keeley appeared beside her. Minutes. Keeley had the expression of someone who had decided, sometime in the last 90 minutes, that an 11-week assessment she'd made of a coworker was wrong and was in the uncomfortable early stages of adjusting it. She stood beside Sasha for a moment without saying anything. Then, you should know, the Sonberg family called this morning. She set a sticky note on the counter. Clara Sonberg. Died. She's been discharged from the cardiac ICU, full recovery. A pause. Her husband asked who flagged the case initially. He wanted to send a note. Ganeshan. Sasha looked at the sticky note. It had a name and a phone number. You can give him the department's general contact, she said. He was specific, Keeley said. He asked for you by name. On the counter. She left the note on the counter and went back to her chart. Keeley watched her for a moment, then moved away without saying anything else. The watching had said enough. Unarmed information. Stahl found her again. At the end of the shift. It was 6:40 p.m., and the ER was in that particular end-of-day configuration, where the morning's disruptions had been absorbed, and the evening rotation was coming in, and the department was resetting itself with the impersonal efficiency of a system that had been running long enough to run itself. He stood a careful distance away, not the assertive proximity of authority. the cautious distance of someone recalibrating. Montgomery, he said. Archer's office contacted administration. Come in. I know. Documentation. They're requesting documentation. The scheduling records, the Sonberg case notes, the communications. He stopped. I need you to know that what I wrote in that message was not. Another stop. I thought I was protecting the department. For me, she said. Not combative, just accurate. Team. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had used that particular justification enough times that he'd stopped examining it, and was only now, in the specific discomfort of this specific conversation, beginning to examine it. Uncertainty, he said. I didn't know your background. So you characterized it as instability. An answer spoke. He didn't answer that. She hadn't expected him to. The honest answer and the answer he was willing to say out loud were not the same answer, and she wasn't going to stand here waiting for him to find his way to honesty. She had other things to do. Wait with the inquiry. Fully, she said. That's all I have for you right now. And I mean Freeman. She picked up her bag and walked out of the R, through the side entrance she'd used, on her first morning, out into the October evening, where Duluth was doing what it did at dusk. Cold and clean and lit at the edges, with the kind of light that turned everything briefly honest before the dark came in. She drove to the lake. For any reason. Not for any reason she could have articulated to Dr. Ingram in their Wednesday session, except that she needed to be somewhere that wasn't the hospital, and wasn't her apartment, and wasn't a room where anything was required of her. She sat in her car in the lakeside parking lot and looked at the water, and let the day do what days like this needed to do, which was settle. Anna deigned again. The man in the OR, whose name she'd learned from Archer when the paperwork had been cleared, whose face she hadn't recognized until she saw it in context, whose team had held a position for 43 minutes, had made it through surgery. Dr. Chen had sent a message through the task force's medical liaison. The leg was compromised, but intact. Knows when the 43 minutes had suggested 3 minutes had suggested it might be. She'd been told also through the liaison that his first question in recovery was the same as his question in the field. She relayed through Archer that she was fine, that she was still in the hospital, that he should stop asking about her and focus on physical therapy. The liaison had sent back. He says that's not going to happen, but he acknowledges the recommendation. She almost smiled. Almost. And her phone rang. Dr. Ingram's number. Man, she answered. He said. He was a man of few preambles. Small city. Been a long day, she said. Enters a somewhere quiet at? A lake. Yes. Good. He was quiet too for a moment. How are you doing, actually? Don't know yet, she said. I think I'm going to need a few days to find out. That's fine. That's the correct answer, actually. A Baird. She watched the water. The lake had gone dark while she'd been sitting there, the last of the light pulling away from the surface, leaving it just its own color, which was the color of everything deep and cold and containing. Weeks, she said. Making myself so small that nobody would look twice at me, and I think I needed that. I think the first month here, the quiet, the routine, I needed it. She paused. But I think by week 8 I'd stopped choosing it and started being it, if that distinction makes sense. Makes sense, Ingram said. I walked out of the supply room today, she said. Not because someone told me to, because it was the only place that was correct for me to be. Smite. Do you think you can walk out again tomorrow? And about the assignment inquiry. About Archer's office, and SCOD records, and the scheduling records, and the HR review that would take weeks, and produce a report that would be procedurally accurate and not dramatically satisfying. About Keeley's sticky note with the Sonberg family's phone number. About Ruiz, who had noticed the muscle memory and how she stalked the crash cart and hadn't made it a bigger thing than it was. And she said, "I think I can." Alerted. The inquiry moved the way. Institutional inquiries moved. Methodically, without fanfare, through a process that required documentation and interviews, and the particular patience of people willing to sit with unresolved things long enough for them to resolve. Archer's office ran the federal portion. The Minnesota Board of Nursing received a parallel referral. Director at Mercy Regional. HR Director at Mercy Regional. A man named Bergstrom, who had approved 11 consecutive weeks of supply rotation for a nurse with Sasha's qualifications without a single escalation flag, submitted a memo of explanation that explained very little, and announced, 17 days later, that he was resigning to pursue other opportunities. The administrator spoke. Stahl was placed on administrative review. The Sonberg case had generated its own thread, a formal inquiry into whether the delayed intervention had met the standard of care, and the communications with the nurse manager had been incorporated into that thread in a way that would take time to fully surface, but would, Archer's office confirmed, surface. The nurse manager, whose name was Darren Poole, and who had been at Mercy Regional for 6 years, and had apparently treated Stahl's directives as a weather system to move with rather than evaluate, Soldier spoke, resigned 3 weeks after the inquiry began. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. Everyone who read it understood that personal reasons meant he'd seen the shape of what was coming, and had decided to be somewhere else when it arrived. None of it was fast. None of it produced the specific clean satisfaction that Sasha had learned over the course of her life to stop expecting from real situations. Real situations produced real results, which meant imperfect and procedural and contingent on people in offices making decisions she'd never fully observed. Lime's statements were on record, but the communications Wunberg data was on record. The Sonberg family's statement was on record, and it was specific and detailed and had been given to the inquiry without a lawyer present, which suggested that Clara Sonberg had been wanting to give it for a while. Office called to tell her. 6 weeks after the Tuesday, the call came through that the federal inquiry had closed with findings. Stahl was facing a formal censure from the state medical board. The Sonberg thread was ongoing. The policies at Mercy Regional's ER were under mandatory review by hospital administration. She was sitting in her car in the hospital parking lot when the call came, having just come off a shift. A trauma support shift, the first of what had become a new standard assignment, Eiffel spoke. Because the acting department head, a physician named Dr. Petra Solis, who had been pulled in from the internal medicine floor while the ER situation sorted itself out, had looked at Sasha's credentials on day 1 and said, very simply, "Why is this person on supply rotation?" Had had a good answer. Nurse spoke. Sasha had gone to trauma support the following morning. The work was different, not because it was harder. She'd been doing hard work for 11 weeks, just in the wrong room. But because it was located at the right intersection of her skill and someone else's need, which was where work was supposed to be. Priya. There was no Priya here, but there was a nurse named Lena, 26, fast and perceptive, and quietly crushed by the way Stahl had run the department. Notcher spoke, who had started to unfold once the pressure of his system had begun to lift. Ruiz, who had always known what he was looking at when he looked at Sasha, kept bringing her the good coffee he made in the back room and not making it a thing. Small adjustments, the furniture of a department rearranging itself. Within a recovery room. She went to see the man in the recovery room. His name was Callum, which was the one name she knew from. Before, that wasn't in any file on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks after the surgery. He was sitting up. The leg was in an external fixator that he looked at with the expression of a man conducting an ongoing, unwinnable negotiation with his own body. Like yourself, he said. A nurse, she said. Which is what I am. Like both. He gestured at the chair beside the bed. Sit down. You've been standing for 8 hours. In combat, she sat. How's the pain? Element. The spoke. It's not irrelevant. It's just inconvenient. That's different. At her with the direct attention she remembered from before, unchanged by 3 years, and an exfil that had gone badly, and a surgical table, and several rounds of anesthesia. Archer told me about the inquiry. Archer tells you everything. She tells me what I need to know. She thought I needed to know. He adjusted his position slowly, with the care of someone who had been instructed in very specific terms about what movements were and were not permitted. 11 weeks on supply rotation. Was building something, she said. A supply room? That didn't ask too much of me. She looked at his leg, at the hardware around it, at the careful architecture of what Dr. Chien had put back together. I think I needed about 6 weeks of that. The last 5 were habit. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, he said. The team filed a commendation for the Bay work. Your name's on a federal record now, not the call sign, your name, as the responding medical specialist who preserved a priority asset during a critical retrieval. He paused. That's not going away. Whatever anyone at this hospital says or tries to build around it. Look at him. You did that. Good. I told her it was correct. He looked at the window. It was correct. A Bonseed. She sat with him until he fell asleep, which didn't take long. His body was doing the serious work of repair and had submitted its own requirements, and she watched his breathing even out and thought about what he'd said. The record. Her name on it, her actual name, the name she'd been trying to live quietly inside for 2 years. Both things, she thought. The person who had run in forward operating bases, in situations where the closest surgical team was an hour away. The person who ran along the lakeshore in the mornings and sat in Dr. Ingram's office on Wednesdays, and had learned slowly and imperfectly how to be in a room that wasn't a threat. Neither of those people was wrong. They were the same person. And Soldier spoke. She left him sleeping and took the elevator down and walked back into the ER, which was loud and ordinary and completely itself. And she picked up the chart at the top of the stack and read it and went to work. 6 weeks later, a framed document appeared on the wall of Mercy Regional's emergency department between the fire evacuation instructions and the trauma protocol chart. It was addressed to Sasha Bellamy, RN, spoke, and cited her role in a federal priority medical retrieval. It was signed at a level above anyone she'd interacted with directly, and it had been CC'd to the Minnesota State Board of Nursing and to the hospital's administration. Dr. Solis had put it up. Sasha found out when she came in for a morning shift, and it was already there. Lena was at the station, charting, and she looked up when Sasha came in and said nothing. Just tilted her head in the direction of the wall. Sasha stood in front of it. For a moment. Her name, in official type, on official paper, on the wall of the department where she had restocked medication cabinets and updated inventory logs, and been called an unknown quantity by a man who'd been wrong about every part of that. She thought about the woman who'd arrived 11 weeks ago through the side entrance, with a deliberately small footprint and a deliberately quiet file, trying to build a life that the noise couldn't reach. That woman hadn't been wrong to want what she'd wanted. The manager spoke. She'd needed the mornings along the lake and Dr. Ingram's office, and the particular piece of a room where nothing was required except counting things correctly. Counting had never been the point. But the counting had never been the point. The counting had been the shelter, and you could only live in a shelter so long before it became the ceiling. Nurse spoke. She touched the frame once, lightly, and turned back to the nurse's station. Lena pushed a coffee across the counter, the good kind, the kind Ruiz had taught her to make. Ready? She said. Come in. Sasha picked up the chart at the top of the stack. Come in, she said. Come in, so she was. About Sasha a lot, since I finished writing this story. Not the version of her that walked into the federal retrieval and placed a tourniquet assessment in under 60 seconds. The version that showed up through the side entrance on her first morning deliberately. Because fewer people meant fewer questions. That version is the one I keep coming back to. There's something most of us don't talk about, honestly, which is that sometimes we make ourselves small on purpose. Not because we're forced to, but because we're tired. Because the places we came from asked too much, cost too much, and the quiet feels like the only thing we have left that belongs entirely to us. Sasha built that quiet intentionally. She chose Duluth, chose the side entrance, chose 11 weeks of medication logs over trauma bays, because she needed to learn how to breathe inside a life that wasn't running on emergency. I don't think that was weakness. I think it was the most honest thing she could have done at the time. Come in, Gear. But here's what the story showed me. There's a version of retreat that heals you, and there's a version that slowly becomes a ceiling. And the difference between them is whether you're still choosing it or whether it started choosing you. By week 8, Sasha had stopped deciding to be invisible. She'd just become it. And that's the moment. Not when Stahl wrote the email, not when the federal call came through. That's the moment the story actually turns on. And what I find hard to shake is Stahl. Not because he was monstrous. He wasn't. He was a man who had been right for a long time and had confused being right with being unchallengeable. And when someone showed him an error, his response was to remove the person rather than examine the pattern. That's not rare. That's one of the most ordinary failures a person with authority can make. Renner spoke. His integrity had eroded so gradually that he genuinely believed he was protecting the department. The mind does that. It retrofits justification onto decisions that were actually made from ego, and once the retrofit is complete, you can't see the seam. The 3 things that dismantled Stahl's system were not dramatic. They were a medication log that someone filed with unusual precision, a tech named Ruiz who noticed something and said it out loud. Didn't argue, didn't perform, just kept doing the work correctly in every room she was given, no matter how small. That's what integrity looks like in practice. Not the loud moment. Not the loud moment. The consistent, unwitnessed standard you hold yourself to when nobody's rewarding you for it. In Sasha's mind, the way she processed the Sonberg presentation, the way she read a wound before the stretcher cleared the doors, that didn't come from instinct in the romantic sense. It came from years of paying attention in conditions where tension was the difference between someone living and someone not. Intelligence isn't static, men. It's built through contact with hard things, through the discipline of staying curious when you're also afraid, through choosing to understand rather than just react. She carried that into a supply room and kept sharpening it on inventory logs until the moment it was needed. To him. What stayed with me most is this. She never stopped being a nurse. Through the rotation, the quiet, the emails she didn't know existed. She was always exactly what she was. The institution tried to make that smaller. It couldn't. Because what you actually are doesn't live in your assignment. It lives in what you do when nobody's measuring it. It on the wall was real, but it wasn't. It was just at the point, it was just the evidence of something that had always been true.